Hey man,
I'm a guy who likes to work on my car. I like to take it apart and put it back together.
Crazy, man.
What makes a man do this?
Hello there. Today's session is the first in my assignment series. Over the past 30 years, I've traveled to over 50 countries for many different clients. And the only way I was able to continue getting this work was by treating every assignment as if it was my most important assignment. The rule is always the same. Basically, you have to deliver, and you have to deliver the best possible images that you can get that fit the client's brief. I was thinking that it might be interesting to look at various assignments that I've undertaken and to talk about why they stood out for me. And I'll put them on a separate section on my YouTube channel page. I've chosen this particular assignment to start the series because it illustrates the need to keep oneself fluid and to not get caught up in any preconceived ideas of how a job will unfold. This assignment took place in the mid-90s and was commissioned by the Sunday Telegraph. The brief was to cover a San Bushman conference in Windhoek, capital of Namibia, and it seemed a very easy job. We expected cultural events, dancing, that kind of thing, opportunities where I could get decent photographs. The images that I took at that stage were on film, and they're in a box somewhere, so I can't show you those particular images. So what I've got up today are photographs of the San Bushman that I took during a more recent assignment in the northeast of the country. It's probably a good idea to have a quick geography lesson. George W. said, "Africa is a nation that suffers from terrible disease." Well, Africa isn't a nation. It's made up of 54 different countries. And Namibia is down the bottom here. So this is Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, South Africa. So you've got loads and loads of country. The equator runs through, let me go on to this one, through the middle here somewhere. And this is Southern Africa. I've been to a lot of these countries in Africa, and I have to say, if anyone says where should they go on a holiday in Africa, I always say Namibia. It's 2.5 or just below 2.3 times the size of Germany, and that's this little place here. This gives you an idea of how big Africa is. So between 1884 and 1919, Namibia was called German Southwest Africa. The country was then called Southwest Africa, and it was under the control of South Africa. And in 1990, the country gained independence and became the Republic of Namibia. This is Namibia. South Africa is down here somewhere. Flew to Windhoek, which is the capital. Our initial idea was to land in Windhoek, spend the day at a nice, comfortable hotel, and wrap up our story in a day or so. Plan A soon came to an end because when we arrived at the hotel, there were literally 100 people in suits, government officials and academics. And what they'd forgotten to do was invite any of the Bushmen people to come to the conference. From the journalist's point of view, he could learn something and probably write the story from Windhoek. But for me, it was a real no-no. A picture of people in suits is just not going to crack it. So right then, I just knew I wasn't going to be able to deliver. These kind of situations bring quite a lot of stress immediately because you realize, okay, there's nothing visually for you to photograph, and I knew there weren't Bushman communities anywhere around Windhoek. So I persuaded the journalist to come sit in a coffee shop and strategize with me, and it was like, okay, what do we do? What do we do? I was also aware of the time consideration because it's such a huge country. If I needed to travel somewhere, I needed to leave immediately in order to get back the next day with my photographs to develop them, print them, and in those days one would have to put them on a roller. So this is Windhoek, and the Bushman areas are kind of all around here on the eastern side, bordering Botswana. And it doesn't look very far here, but from Windhoek to the nearest Bushman settlement area was 500 kilometers or over 300 miles. So that's, in American terms, it's like driving from New York to Boston, or in UK terms, it's like driving from London to Manchester. Eventually, the journalist agreed that there was no point in me hanging around in Windhoek. I've got to get on the road and get something that can illustrate the story. By that stage, we had already thought that our story was heading in the direction that the Bushman communities were under severe threat. Their traditional way of life was being severely curtailed by the Namibian government. So we realized we needed photographs that showed how Bushmen were living in their communities in present day. The first thing I needed to do was find a car rental. Unlike hiring a car in developed nations, at this stage, Namibia didn't have many car rental places, and the cars were pretty old and clunked out. So my first challenge was to find a decent enough car to get me to the Bushman community areas. This wasn't as easy as it sounds. You had to find some local company that would rent you a car. The really strange thing is how quickly you can have to move from one idea to the next idea and then try implement it as quickly as possible. I managed to find a City Golf in reasonable condition, probably about 8 years old. I just grabbed my bag, chucked it in the back of the car, got my cameras, put them in the front seat, and off I started driving. So I headed up quite a good road north from Windhoek and moved towards Grootfontein, and the eventual goal was to find the settlement on the northeastern side of the country here. By the time I reached this point, I realized that the light was fading fast, and this was going to be my next challenge. I not only had to find the community, but then I had to introduce myself, tell them what I'm up to, find a situation that would illustrate what I needed, and get the pictures before the light vanished completely. I eventually came to a T-junction leading off to the right, which was a gravel road, and there was a small, looked like a trucker's stop on the left. So I stopped there, went in and asked for some directions, and they said, just head off down the road, you'll see it, it's just so obvious. And when someone tells you that, you just know it's never going to be so obvious. I hadn't seen a decent signpost for the last 500 kilometers. So anyway, they said, go down there, you'll see a bridge, and then it'll be this, and turn right, and then you'll find the settlement. And that's the type of directions that I got. And I headed off down this gravel road, hoping to still have enough light to photograph. Since I'd got off the plane that morning, my expectations of what I could produce for the story had dramatically diminished. At this stage, I was thinking that 2 to 3 average to decent photographs would see me through. After going over about 5 bridges and coming back and retracing my steps, I eventually found the place. It's just one of those things, you're in this situation, and what are you meant to do? You know, it's like these people don't know you from a bar of soap. You're just this weird guy arriving in a bright City Golf, and you're telling them you're wanting to an important story about that illustrates their particular living conditions. How do you get that kind of information across? And the only way is you smile a lot, you try to show that you're being authentic, and you hope you get some access. Luckily, the Bushmen people are just known for being incredibly relaxed and easygoing. Anyway, they invited me in, and I managed to explain what I wanted. I think on this particular trip I was using 400 ASA black and white film. So even with that fairly high-speed film, I was down to probably 60th of a second, 50th of a second, f5.6. For those people who don't know the technical details, it means you're right on the edge of possibility here. I realized I didn't have anything that would blow anyone away, but I decided that's it. I'm going to start heading back. I was going up to say thank you to the elders of the village, And I saw that they had put out a whole display of things that they hoped I was going to buy. After them being so accommodating to me, I felt that was the least I could do. So by the time I left the settlement, it was already dark. And the initial part of the drive back was fine, relaxed. But when I hit the major highway, the truckers were rampaging down the road at high speed and pitch black, no white lines on the road. So after about an hour of this, I realized this was incredibly dangerous. And I stopped at a small place which looked like kind of trucker's stop. At that point, I was exhausted. So I'd made my decision. I was going to spend the night, whatever. I walked up to the front door, and just to give you an idea, it was really dirty, really run down, and pretty much only had 2 or 3 rooms. So to say there was a reception would have been generous. There was a guy sitting in the corner on a chair, and there was a piece of wood in front of him, and he was drinking a beer. And I wandered up, and I could see he thought, sure, what is this guy on about? What's he doing here? So I said, look, do you have, naively, do you have a room? I just wanted to have a few hours sleep. The way he looked at me, I should have realized straight away this is not going to go well. He kind of nodded and said, okay, yeah, we've got a room. And I was starting to feel very uneasy. And what I realized was happening is that this was more of a brothel than a truck stop. But I'd got so far, so I thought, okay, just keep on going. So I got myself in the room, and I looked at the bed. The bed sheets had not been changed. It must have been for a month. They were gray, black, and yeah, I won't give you any more explanation. But I was so exhausted. I remember putting my bags down, and I rummaged through them, and I found a couple of bits of clothing. I tried to cover the blankets. I lay down as gingerly as possible, trying not to get any part of my body to touch the actual bed. And I fell asleep almost immediately. The next morning I woke up rigid, possibly in exactly the same position I'd gone to sleep. But I was quite relieved I didn't land up with my mouth dribbling into a dirty pillow. This was now probably 5:36 the next morning. I hadn't had anything to eat since the plain food of the previous morning, so I was starving. I packed, got on the road, and headed off to Windhoek. So this was in a time when there were no cell phones, so I couldn't organize how to get the film developed, how to get it sent. I was just going to wing it when I got to Windhoek. I had a friend and colleague who worked for Reuters news agency in Windhoek, and I thought that's where I'm going to go. So John Liebenberg was the Reuters photographer in Namibia. He was quite a unique and eccentric guy, living in a small house on the outskirts of Windhoek. I remember I used to talk. He would be like, "Hey, Mr. G, come in, man." We had all experienced a lot of violence by that stage, but I think John had seen more than he should have. Working as a photographer now is so different. You can go straight back to your hotel, you can download the photographs, order room service, get a beer, and work on the photographs at your leisure in Photoshop. But at the time of this assignment, I was still using film, and we had to go in the darkroom, develop the film, then dry it in a dryer, then look at it on the light table, choose the images. Then you would have to print the images, which if it's in color, it can take forever. But in this case, we had black and white, so we printed up a few images, and then we put them on the roller to send them through to the Sunday Telegraph picture editor. It was only after we had got confirmation that the photographs had arrived safely and they were reasonably happy with the job that I could start to relax. John and I sat under a tree in his garden having a beer. Although this particular assignment wasn't that spectacular in terms of photographs, I think it illustrates the need for flexibility and perseverance within a job. The 36 hours had been a blur of activity, and it required constant reevaluation on what I should be doing next. So in cases like this, it usually takes a day or two for one's mind to process what went on and to look closer at the decisions that one made. Yeah. Okay, well, if you have any ideas or comments on how I could improve these videos, please connect with me below and I'll definitely respond. Otherwise, like, subscribe, and thanks very much for watching.
Is it over yet?
Yes, it is good. It really is.
What are they?
Well, And find out what the future holds in store.
Is it over yet?